Dean Rusk disagrees with you, and he was the Secretary of State at the time, but that's fine.
The communist nations have exploited the turmoil of a time of transition in an effort to extend communist control into other areas of the world.
Thoughts on Dean Rusk and America's involvement in Vietnam? I know next to nothing about that.
Exactly.
Fred Burton was 15 years old when his neighbor, Joe Alon, was murdered in cold blood. The assassin was never caught, and the case was closed. Though he didn't know it at the time, the incident would echo throughout his life, both as an investigator and as an author. After beginning his career as a Maryland police officer, Fred became a special agent with the Diplomatic Security Service, becoming chief of the DSS's Counterterrorism Division. He was intimately involved in the investigation and arrest of Ramzi Youssef, the mastermind behind the first World Trade Center bombing, and the pursuit of Abu Nidal and several other high-profile terrorists and assassins. Many of these were detailed in his book, Ghost: Confessions of a Counterterrorism Agent. His life came full circle when he reopened the investigation into Joe Alon's murder, which he chronicled in Chasing Shadows. His most recent book, Beirut Rules, tells the harrowing story of the abduction of a CIA station chief, William Buckley, by Hezbollah, and the frantic search that ended with his torture and murder, and ignited a war with extremism that continues today. As long as there are threats to the United States, you can bet Fred Burton will be thinking about how to stop them, and sharing that knowledge in his brilliant writings.
I'm Fred Burton, the author of Beirut Rules. When I was a special agent with the State Department in the 1980s, I was assigned to work on the hostages that were kidnapped in Lebanon by Hezbollah. And one of the key drivers behind our efforts was the kidnapping of a CIA station chief by the name of William Buckley. And I've always wanted to tell his story because this is a hero who died for his country. You had just had an embassy bombing in Beirut that basically took the legs out from underneath all the U.S. intelligence collection efforts in Lebanon. The CIA station had been bombed at a gathering of a meeting of intelligence officers, so the entire footprint for intelligence operations had stopped. And they were looking for a man to go into Beirut, and Bill Buckley raised his hand and volunteered to go. And I was always fascinated when I was working the case in the 1980s. What drove this man to want to run towards danger? It kind of reminded me of firefighters and police officers running into the Twin Towers on 9/11. This was a person that volunteered to go to Beirut during a time period that was extraordinarily dangerous and one that Americans had been targeted for kidnappings and had been victimized. Buckley is sent into the lion's den basically with an organization that had been formulated to target the Nazis in World War II, to defeat the evil axis of global problems and wars. And you had an organization that had then been primarily focused on the Cold War with the Berlin Wall and doing battle very clandestinely against the Soviet KGB. So then you had this organization in the 80s that were now thrown into the midst of all this global terror in Beirut. And Buckley is the man that goes into Lebanon to try to rebuild the CIA's network during this time period. And they were still operating under kind of a Cold War principle, and yet they were dealing with these ruthless thugs and killers that were using the gun and the bomb to kill Americans. Beirut Rules is a true story of William Buckley, the only CIA chief of station that's ever been kidnapped and murdered by a foreign terrorist organization.